So, good afternoon, everyone. I am Desmond Meade, Executive Director of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and I want to thank you for joining me for round two of Real Justice PAC event, where we take a moment to talk about our criminal justice system and re-examine how it's interacting with us regular folks like me, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic that we're find ourselves in today. As a result, jails and prisons are hotspots for the spread of the virus, and prosecutors, defenders, judges, and even some sheriffs have been hustling to get people out of harm's way and out of these jails and prisons. And that includes, as a matter of fact, some of our guests that's on here today, Chesa Boudin, Rachael Rollins, and of course, Jose Garza. And so I'm gonna introduce them in a minute. Then I'm going to let them really be able to talk more about the programs that they're doing. But once again, thank you all for being here. Now, our guest today is Chesa Boudin. He's a newly elected district attorney of San Francisco, and he has reduced the jail population by 40%, 40% since he took office. Then we have Rachael Rollins. I think Rachael was with us last time. And Rachael has been filing pleadings to bring huge quantity of people home. Last time we talked, she talked about these big time lawsuits that she was either engaged in or supporting, and we definitely will want to hear more about that today. Definitely been putting pressure on the governor of Massachusetts to review cases of people who do not need to be in prison for any public safety reason. And last but not least, we have Jose Garza, former public defender, who is currently running for district attorney in Austin, Texas, deep in the heart of Texas, and was one of the first people in the entire state to call for people to be released from jail and prison, and has continued organizing and putting political pressure on officials there to protect the health and safety of those incarcerated and the surrounding communities. A side note, due to unforeseen circumstances, I know Jose is not going to be able to be with us the entire time. And so, Jose, we're going to definitely try to engage you a little bit more at the first half of this broadcast. But anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. Today, we're going to shift the focus just a little bit, and I'm going to ask our guests to take a step back and think about what we've learned so far about the flaws in our justice system as we work to accelerate releasing people from jail and imagine what a better system will look like when it's over. So I've already introduced you. Jose, I want you to go ahead and take it from the top.
Desmond, first of all, thank you so much for your incredible advocacy and for your service. You have done so much work to shed light on and to repair our broken criminal justice system. And I'm just greatly appreciative. It's a real honor to be with Rachael and Chesa. The entire country is watching with optimism as you have laid out a new vision for what safety looks like in our communities, and we're all cheering your success. So I'm just incredibly excited really to be with all of you. As Desmond said, my name is Jose Garza, and I'm running to be the district attorney in Travis County. And I started my career as a public defender, both at the state and federal system down on the Texas-Mexico border. And in those jobs, I saw every single day the way that our criminal justice system weighs most heavily on working class people and on people of color. But this conversation, the conversation that we are about to have, in many ways isn't new. Public defenders all over the country have been talking for decades about this broken system. They have been working to call attention to our broken sentencing policies, to our broken charging policies, to our broken bail policies. And so as a former public defender, I've also spent a lot of time thinking about ways that we can and should fix our broken system. I also spent some time in the Obama administration, and I now lead a worker center in Austin and in other cities in Texas called Workers Defense Project. And in those jobs, I really saw every day the power that regular people have, that people who are listening and watching this town hall have to change their communities and to change our criminal justice system. And I know right now in Travis County, our community is excited to make that change and ready to make that change. And I'm just grateful to be with all of you. Excited for the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jose. Chesa, you know, listen, in the introduction, we talked about this 40%, man. That is huge, right? And so as you introduce yourself, I definitely want you to talk about how you did it, right? Talk about the reduction in the jail population, but also the explosions that's going on in prison right now.
Absolutely. Well, Desmond, thank you for your work. It's an honor to be here with you, with Rachel, with Jose. I wish we could all be on stage or, you know, in the same room together. I always have a good time when I get to actually be with Rachel in the same room. So this is as close as we can get given COVID-19. You know, let me just say what we did in San Francisco to reduce our jail population was really, in some ways, very simple. We listened to our public health officials. The director of jail medical in San Francisco said to us that we had to get our jail population down to a target of about 700 people. That was a huge reduction from where I was when we took office. I was in the 1200s, high 1200s when we took office in January. But we listened to public health experts, and thankfully, by following their lead, we've been able to avoid a significant outbreak in our jail. And we know across the state of California and across the country, there are large COVID-19 outbreaks in jails and prisons. In California, according to a recent report, of the 1,600 tests that were first administered in jails across the state, about a third of them came back positive. In Los Angeles County Jail, for example, 290 inmates tested positive, over 100 staff members. And we know across the country, Rikers Island, one prison in Ohio having over 80% of the population test positive, numerous deaths. Cook County Jail in Chicago with over 500 positive tests. In San Francisco so far, we've had just three positive tests of inmates, just 2 of staff, and no deaths, thankfully. And the reason for that is because we worked early and hard to follow public health experts' advice. What that meant was identifying people who were low risk or no risk, getting them out of jail. Identifying people who were elderly or had underlying medical conditions that meant they were a very high risk if they tested positive, and finding ways to get them out of jail. It also meant expediting release of people who were going to get released anyway. In our system in San Francisco, we have about 65% of people in jail who would spend a week or less there. That's not about public safety. That's destabilizing lives, and is contributing to a churn of people in and out of the jail who could bring a disease in with them or take it home when they leave. So we implemented a range of policies to expedite decision-making and to expedite release for people who had no business being in jail in the first place.
Chesa, thank you so much, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. You mentioned a few things that I really jotted down while you were talking that I'm definitely going to want to follow up with you before you end the call. You're not leaving early, are you? Chesa, you don't have to leave early, am I correct?
No, you got me, Desmond. I'll be here.
Okay, so I don't know if you tuned in last time, so
You're
let
correct.
me just
I'll be here.
You and Jose, I know Rachel was here last time, but let me just give you this little backdrop. See, I'm a returning citizen. And so the last time that, you know, in my previous life, the only time I had conversations with DAs was when they was cross-examining me on the stand, right, trying to lock me up. And so what we're doing right here, this discussion is so meaningful to me because, you know, it really talks about this journey, but it also now gives me the opportunity to put DAs on the cross-examine on the stand to cross-examine. So I'm looking forward to this. I just want you to know that that's the mindset I'm coming from, but we're going to have some fun with it today. Okay, Chesa? Thumbs up?
That sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Rachel,
I'm glad to be here with you, and I'm glad you're home, Desmond.
Yes. Rachel, definitely want to give you a moment to just talk a little bit more about you. I know that you are a lot of folks that's on the Zoom today definitely remember you from last time, but could you just talk to us a little bit more about what's going on in your neck of the woods and who you are as a person?
Sure. So I am a DA that has had my wonderful job. I won my election back in 2018, September 4th, and then November 6th, the general election, and took office January 2nd of 2019. When I think of myself and why I am a little bit unique in this role is, like Chesa, I have people that I love very much that have been incarcerated or are currently incarcerated. I am fully aware, and not just from reading the new Jim Crow, but from living an experience, having visited jails, etc., that my siblings that I love very much, you can love people and not agree with the choices they make, or even be smart enough to understand sometimes they aren't choices. They are circumstances that people find themselves in where there is no other alternative than what they choose or believe they have to choose to do. People are more than just the worst moment in their life or one decision. We all demand that of ourselves, and when we are spoken of, and I am very vocal about making sure that we are treating people, irrespective of where we find them and where they are or what they are alleged to have done, as human beings first in every circumstance. So with respect to COVID, well, I took my office and I was the DA that said these 15 areas of crimes, the presumption is not going to be jail. The presumption is going to be diversion, dismissal, of null pros, or some other alternative that, if accountability is even the right name or word, because of course, if you're mentally ill, I don't hold you accountable for your mental illness. Of course, if you suffer from food or housing insecurity, I'm not holding you accountable because you are poor. We aren't even using the right terminology when we describe the ailments and the societal failures that a lot of the individuals that we come in contact with in this role we're in, not these wonderful people who have been public defenders, who are often the closest person defending them. So I'm the DA that ran on the premise of these 15 crimes, low-level, non-violent, non-serious crimes. Let's figure out a societal response to those rather than incarceration or a carceral response. So that's one. What we've done in Massachusetts, which I'm proud of, is our public defenders are amazing here. Our Mass Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers is astonishing and dope and activists, and they got right on it and immediately filed something in our Supreme Judicial Court back on March 24th saying, this is unacceptable. If we are really flattening the curve, if we are truly going to try to beat COVID-19 by doing the two things all of us are doing every day, social distancing, 6 feet away from each other, not being in groups of 10, and extreme hygiene, the worst place you can think of in the world of being is in a jail or a prison or a house of corrections, where overwhelmingly individuals have a 5 by or 6 by 8 cell, an open toilet with no seat covering, and it's not called a roommate, which a lot of people like to try to describe it as. This is an awful situation pre-COVID-19, but adding that fact, it was a problem. So we, as the DA, I tried to file and join as a petitioner, not a respondent, because I don't feel that my viewpoints are aligned with the other DAs and the sheriffs and all these individuals holding and clinging on to the status quo and demanding that they were right without allowing there to be transparency. And we got a marginal victory, I think, for our pretrial detainees, but what it exposed, guys, is our post-conviction sentence population had virtually no recourse but for the governor, right, or the parole board, both of whom were not doing much, if anything at all. So I wrote a letter to the governor asking him to do more.
Rachel, thank you so much for this. And so let's move straight forward into some of the questions. You know, in response to COVID-19, I know a lot of organizations, like even my organization, we were very concerned about the jail and prison populations as far as whether or not they have protections. And as we were having conversations with jail administrators, the thing that stood out the most was that a lot of folks that was actually in our county jails were people who had even been convicted yet. They were people who were basically too poor to afford bail, right? That now here they are in the jails, they're facing death because of COVID-19, and they were going to die because they was too poor to actually post bail. And so I really want to, Jose, matter of fact, I want to throw it at you first. I really want you to talk about what are some of the destabilizing effects on the money bail system and of pretrial detention overall, especially in your experience as a public defender.
Great, thank you so much. What a great question. Let me also just give folks a little bit of context about our situation in Texas. So over the last couple of weeks, positive COVID-19 cases in our jails and prisons have skyrocketed. Prisoners are dying, employees are dying, and the virus is moving back and forth between the jail and into communities as workers and people come in and out of those facilities. Here in the state of Texas, there are over 1,300 prisoners who have been infected, 1,300 people who have been infected, and over 500 employees in our prisons throughout the state. And 23 prisoners have died as a result of this virus. And they have died needlessly because as Chesa and Rachael laid out, there are clear steps that our public health officials have said that we all should be taking. Now, in Travis County, immediately after the outbreak, there was an effort to begin to reduce the number of people sitting in our county jail. But in the last couple of weeks, that number has started to rise again. And as we sit here today, as we talk on this Zoom call, the majority of people sitting in our jail are there because they can't afford to pay bail. They're there because they simply can't buy their way out of this incredibly dangerous condition. And on top of that, close to 60% of people sitting in our jail are charged with nonviolent offenses as we sit here today. And we know that the cash bail system has a devastating impact on communities. It separates working people from their jobs and their families. It creates generations and cycles of instability, of poverty in some cases. And ultimately, that makes our communities less safe. And so, there has been, as I said, some recent changes that I don't think meet the high standards that Chesa and Rachael have laid out. And we have so much work to do, to build a criminal justice system that lifts up working people instead of having one that locks people up. So I think we are on a path towards that, but we have a long way to go.
All right, so Jose, I want to just push you just a little bit, right? Because I think that you served in a very honorable position as what I consider one of the last lines of defense for people who are being accused of a crime, right? And so I'm wondering, in your role when you were a public defender, right? Was there anything particular that really just picked at you or poked at you about this cash bail system that you think that, man, if I ever DA, I would change this particular thing?
We don't have enough time on this call for all of the particular things.
Give me your number one. Give me your number one.
That are disastrous about the current policy, but we should talk about several. And let's begin with this, is that first of all, our cash bail system far too often keeps people in jail who are innocent. One of my first cases as a public defender was a young man who was struggling with substance use. He was charged with possession of narcotics. We took that case to trial, and he was ultimately found not guilty after he sat in jail for 8 months because he couldn't afford to get out. We know that people lose their jobs when they're sitting in jail because they can't afford to pay bail. And when they lose their jobs, it means they're not putting food on the table, they're missing bills. as I said, it creates an incredible amount of instability, and that makes households less safe. It makes neighborhoods less safe. It makes all of us less safe.
All right, well, thank you so much, Jose. And then Chesa, definitely want you to, can you talk more about how the practice was when you first took over the prosecutor's office in San Fran, and then what changes did you have to make?
Absolutely, Desmond. It's such a critical issue. I mean, money bail is a system that's in place all across this country. And in San Francisco, when I was a public defender like Jose was, I saw cases day in, day out, where people had a price tag put on their freedom. People who were poor and innocent, or poor and presented no public safety risk, were detained because of their poverty. Even as wealthy people who presented very serious public safety risks were able to buy their freedom. Money bail is a system that privileges the wealthy and the powerful over the poor and the innocent. It privileges the wealthy and the dangerous over the poor and the people who present no danger. We have to change that system. And it was one of my commitments as a candidate, and it was one of my first acts as district attorney to prohibit my staff from ever asking for a judge to impose money bail. If we believe someone can be safely released to the community, then they should be released without regard to their wealth. We can impose non-monetary conditions to keep the community safe. And if someone is so dangerous that we don't feel safe releasing them no matter what the conditions are, then wealth should play no role in their release. We're moving to a risk-based system instead of a wealth-based system.
Yeah, and I would love to just add to these wonderful kings, right? Everyone's innocent until they're proven guilty. Everyone, I don't care about factual, you are innocent until proven guilty, period. No matter what it is we've alleged, and what it's called the risk-based system, Chesa, speaking of, in Massachusetts, we call those dangerousness hearings. I want to hold you, I don't want to hold you, but if I have to hold you, I want it to be because you're dangerous, not because you're poor, right? And I would be remiss, this is all about, it's penalizing poverty is basically what the bail system is. And, when we look at poor people in the criminal legal system, and overwhelmingly, Desmond, Black and brown people, I was saying the other day with respect to Ahmaud Arbery, we're the only people in the world that get blamed for being murdered. And we are the users of this system over and over and over again. And Chesa is totally right. Same exact crime. I'm wealthy, Chesa's not wealthy. Same exact crime. I'm going home. He's spending the night or however many nights in jail until he can find somebody to come up with that bail. And we all know, think about any of the people watching this or listening to this. If you are a parent, if you have ever been more than 2 minutes late picking your child up from daycare, you know that they charge you $10 a minute sometimes. If that emergency call that they try to call when you're late picking your child up, if they don't pick up, if you have a great daycare center, they call and wait for you. If you don't, a 51A might be filed. That's what it's called in Massachusetts, where the Department of Children and Families gets involved. And then you now have DCF oversight on you. They might take away your child. If you are held in jail, there are so many collateral consequences that come from that one decision that prosecutors have tons of autonomy to make. And very candidly, Chesa, I don't know if it's the same with you. It's completely arbitrary in Massachusetts, right? You could be in one of my courts and one of my employees would ask for a certain crime, $250 bail. Another one might ask for $700 bail. Another one might say personal recognizance. And I get it. Each individual might present something different. But what this has done, Desmond, if I'm very candid, we're proud of the 29% that we've reduced the jail population since COVID-19. But the type of leader I am is, I say to my staff, we shouldn't have had half of these people or more in there in the first place if my policies were actually being implemented correctly. So a different talk, and I will, Jose, when you are gracious enough to win for us and join our Justice League, you will learn how hard it is. It's wonderful to have policies. If they are not being implemented, if you are not training people, I have a 300+ person staff. It's really important that we are watching and seeing this. So data matters, and we're collecting it to see what we can do better to make sure, you know, what I'm saying is actually happening in our court systems in Suffolk County.
Thank you, Rachel. So is there like one thing or one change in particular that you can point to that you made when you got in office?
Yeah, so the first thing, you know, I did, and for me, Suffolk County is I know Boston is known often, unfortunately, as the most racist place in the United States of America, which, you know, not very proud of that. But one of the things, honestly, I'm most proud of is that I was honest about who I was going to be as a candidate. I was very vocal. I did not want to trick people into voting for me and then become this person that they said, like, well, who the hell is that, right? So we put our policies out the way Chesa did very early on as a candidate, and not waiting until I got in. And then when we got in, Desmond, we actually have a senior executive team that reflects the community that we serve. I am proud that when I inherited this office, my top 11 people, all excellent lawyers, all super qualified, no disrespect meant whatsoever. And, you know, my dad is a second generation Irish American, and my mom is first generation West Indian from Barbados, but 11 white people running the Suffolk County DA's office, overwhelmingly didn't live in Suffolk County and certainly didn't represent or reflect the community that comes in contact most frequently with my office. We still have an amazingly now diverse, many of them stayed and are still in the office, but top 11 people now, Desmond, 6 are women, 6 are people of color, 5 Black, 1 Asian. We have 4 former criminal defense lawyers that are in leadership positions in my prosecutor's office. We have 2 people that are fluent in multiple languages. We have a survivor of homicide, and we have multiple people who have loved ones that have been incarcerated, as well as living in the communities that we live. And I still have work to do. We don't have nearly enough LGBTQI representation in our office, nor do we have Latinx representation in our office. So we can't be gloating and, you know, happy and crip walking saying we're doing so wonderfully when we still have a lot of work to do. But diversity and inclusion doesn't just happen because you say the words, just like policies, right? What are you doing to do that? So I'm most proud of our team, and they are working round the clock to implement the changes that we're talking about.
Thank you so much. And I want to shift a little bit to the war on drugs. I know, Jose, you've talked about how a significant percentage of the people who were being held in these jails were people that committed what I like to say low-level crimes, right? And so I want to talk about how, you know, especially in the face of COVID-19, how a lot of people have been released from jails across the country that was held on drug charges, right? In some places like California, the drug possession is now a misdemeanor. In places like Texas, your home state, or Florida, most of these cases are felonies though, all right? And so what should we take from the fact that suddenly prosecutors and judges have decided that people who possess drugs are no longer a danger to society?
Well, I mean, again, what a fantastic question. And what we should take is that it is far past time for us to end the prosecution of these low-level drug offenses. I have said that repeatedly here in Travis County. And again, you know, you're starting to see those changes happening around the country. Texas is a difficult place for some of these changes, but Travis County, Austin is the most progressive county in the state. And people who live in Travis County are ready for that change, and for a couple of reasons. One, at this point, the data is overwhelmingly clear that every day a person struggling with substance use stays in jail, the likelihood that they will commit another crime goes up. Continuing to prosecute these cases, continuing to pursue these policies makes us less safe. The other reason is that we know that in Travis County, prosecuting low-level drug offenses is one of the greatest drivers of racial disparities in our system. In Travis County, 9% of our population is Black. but over 35% of all arrests for drug possession are of Black folks. We know that the number one way that people get arrested and charged for drug possession is through traffic stops. And in Travis County, nearly 60% of all traffic stops that result in a arrest and charge for drug possession are of brown and Black folks. And we don't make up 60% of the county. So, you know, again, it sends a really clear signal that we can move beyond these policies, that there are other ways to treat and address the root causes and harms of substance use, and that continuing to use our criminal legal system to try to address this problem doesn't make us more safe. And in fact, it actively makes our communities less safe. I have to apologize. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. And as you mentioned, we had a little bit of an unexpected an emergency family matter that I have to attend to. But I'm so grateful to all of you and in awe of the work that Rachael and Chesa and that you, Desmond, have already done. And just really grateful for your time. And I wish you guys a great week.
Jose, call me. I want to talk to you because we got to get you in here, okay? I'm not joking. I'll find you. I'm a prosecutor. I'll find you.
Uh-oh. I will call. Thank you so much.
Desmond, if I could, I know Chesa is going to say something now, but you know, when we...
Yeah, I think we might have lost it, but I want to come to you, Rachael, till Chesa come back, because I know it's a low-hanging fruit when we talk about like the drug possession, right? Especially, you know, when you're talking about a person that's maybe battling drug addiction, right? So it's easy to say, oh, let's put them in treatment. They're not a danger to society. But what about the person that's selling drugs, right? Is that person a danger to society as well?
So, I mean, I think we have to look at the various levels. And I refuse to talk about drugs until we acknowledge that now that the demographics of who are doing drugs and dying of drugs changed and has less and less melanin in the people that are actually, you know, dying and addicted and afflicted and harmed, miraculously, our government is looking at this as not a crime, but the health issue that it actually is. They're willing to open their eyes because it could be their children. But back when in the 80s and 90s, when it was crack cocaine and heroin, and the people, Desmond, looked like you and I, it was criminalized and they didn't care, right? So for me, what is very, very important, and in post Ahmaud world now, people's feelings are now irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. I speak truth, period. And if it hurts your feelings, unsubscribe or go to another channel. So recognize this. We start level setting by saying it's based on, like most things in the criminal legal system, race. And poor people and Black and brown people are losing. So I hear you, Desmond.
So
go ahead.
I got to throw, Chesa, you just handed me a beautiful like softball. I got to pitch back at you, right? So when you talk about how the approaches to prosecution of people with drugs kind of shifted, right, because of the lessening of melanin, right? And basically, as long as the way how I took it, as long as it was a Black issue, yes, let's lock these folks up. But when more and more white people started getting, or at least being more public about being addicted to drugs, now let's go get help for these people, right? So my question to you, I see Chesa, you're back, but I got to give this to Rachael real quick, is that my question to you is, do you think that the melanin of a person's skin also influences the propensity or the likelihood to try to categorize what crimes are violent and nonviolent?
Of course. I think this plays into everything, you know, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I will pitch this to Chesa. He spoke very eloquently about it as well. But I will tell you, Desmond, the media and the way that things are portrayed, the way that we are fed our information, when you think about, you know, predators and rapists and what they look like, and you look at it, I don't know, Chesa, if this was your jurisdiction, I know it was California, the Stanford swimmer, right, who brutally raped a woman who was not even capacitated, right? She was incapacitated and got 6 months because of being a Stanford grad, and the judge that had the case was as well. There are so many opportunities that are provided to certain people, and our system is based on looking at an individual and saying, are you worthy, right, of opportunity? Are you worthy of a second chance? And we get blinders on. Implicit bias, Desmond, is in all of us, even me, even you, Chesa as well. We all have our implicit biases, but absolutely, I feel like we are vilified, oftentimes, and criminalized, and a lot of that is fed to us through the media and what we see, right? Mug shots of people charged with certain crimes, other stories when people don't fit the bill aren't told as many times as well. But I'll pitch to Chesa.
Yeah, so Chesa, I'm going to come to you with this question, but I just want to just wrap this up in a neat bow. Just when we talk about the pigmentation of people's skin as it relates to how we're using the terms violent and non-violent, that knowing that the pigmentation of a person's skin plays a role in it, I think it gives us pause, or at least causes us to at least take a step back and think about how we actually categorize individuals, especially when we are talking about not the crime that they committed, but we're talking about individuals in the light of releasing them, right?
100%. Desmond, look, think of the last several active shooters, mass shooters that we have. Dylan Roof was killed people in a church and was gently handcuffed and brought to get something to eat. He's alive right now, and there was witnessed murder. People witnessed him murdering people. I get it, you're innocent until proven guilty. Whereas Ahmad, and I get it, they're different locations, is out jogging. And as I said to you before, what I'm tired of is Black people are the only people in the world that get blamed for being murdered, right? He's all the state. Go ahead.
So here's the thing, right? Because I want to get to Chesa, but here's the thing. I think that what we're seeing here is that not necessarily that you want white people to get more time, but rather you want Black people to get more grace. That same grace.
It's lifting the floor up, right? There's a lot of white people who say, like, God, well, I don't want to be treated like you guys. No one's saying that. We all want to be treated the same way. And if people think this is too extreme, go on the internet and look at the juxtaposed photos in New York of a 18-year-old Black man being beaten because he wasn't social distancing. And that same day, the New York Police Department handing out masks to white people sunbathing. Or Brooklyn, New York, 40 arrests for COVID-19 related violations. 35 of them Black, 4 of them Latinx, and 1 of them white. And to his credit, District Attorney Eric Gonzalez said, I'm dealing with my violent, serious crimes. I don't have time for you and, the way that you are determining who is in violation of criminal laws and who is worthy of another chance.
Yeah. So Chesa, see what happens.
I just want to
off. You see, I'm blaming this on you, right?
We get Rachael Rollins Unchained. That's how I like her.
I know that's right.
Speaking truth.
And I wanted to really definitely touch on that question with you, because I know in California that I think Prop 47 was able to reclassify some of these drug felonies into misdemeanors, right? And so the question to you is that now that we're seeing that prosecutors and judges have decided that people who possess drugs are not a danger to the public, what about people who are selling drugs, right? Should we also have that same approach to them? And do you have that in California?
Well, yeah, I want to answer that question, Desmond. I do want to just echo a couple of things Rachael said about the way that Black people are treated as criminals, even when they're victims. We had a shooting recently in San Francisco. Not going to surprise Rachael, not going to surprise you, Desmond. We had a shooting where a young man with no criminal history, living in the projects, was shot, and the police show up and put him in handcuffs. And it's like, they wouldn't do that to me. They wouldn't do that to my wife. Why is it that someone young, just because he's a young Black man who gets shot, he has no weapons on him, he wasn't involved in any way, he didn't deserve that, he's an innocent victim. And the first thing they do is put him in handcuffs. So I think that speaks to, and Rachael said it well, I'm not going to repeat everything she said, but it does tie into your question about the war on drugs, because we have seen over $1 trillion spent in this country on the war on drugs. And we've seen that despite all that money and all those lives destroyed, drugs on the streets of San Francisco's Tenderloin and, you know, in neighborhoods in Boston and New York City and across this country, drugs are just as available, just as cheap, just as pure as they ever were. And yet we've spent literally more than $1 trillion on the war on drugs, billions of dollars a year incarcerating people. We have more than 400,000 people a year in this country behind bars just for drug offenses. Now, I mean, it's not just something that happens once in a while in some neighborhoods. Every 25 seconds, somewhere in the United States, a person is being arrested for drug possession. Now, in San Francisco and in California, we have moved slowly away from that approach. We have started to recognize that addiction is not a crime. We have started to recognize that simple possession should not be a felony. My predecessor, DA George Gascon, led the way in state reform that you mentioned, Proposition 47, that reduced many felonies for simple possession to misdemeanors. And yet, when I took office, we still had about 20% of our general felony caseload were drug sales cases. And I think for a lot of folks, there's this bright line between users and sellers. You know, users, it's an addiction, it's a disease, we should provide treatment, rehabilitation. Sellers, you know, that they're bad people, they're putting poison on the streets. That's how a lot of people talk about it. But the reality is much more complicated. It's not a bright line, it's gray. We have a lot of people who are arrested and accused of felony drug sales who are selling just to support their own habit. Or who are selling because of their immigration status makes it impossible for them to get any other job, or because they've been trafficked to San Francisco for the purpose of selling. And until we can rescue them from their traffickers, or until we can provide meaningful economic opportunities, or until we can provide 24/7 treatment on demand, we are always going to have those people selling drugs. When I was a public defender, I worked in our drug court, a collaborative court that focuses on healing and treatment and restoring people to their full potential rather than securing criminal convictions and lengthy jail sentences. And I represented many, many people accused of low-level crimes because of their addiction. And I tried talking with a lot of these folks about what it was that we could do as a system to help break the cycle of them coming in and out. And one of them said something to me I'm never going to forget. He said, Chesa, in San Francisco, it is easier to get high than it is to get help. That's why I'm committed to advocating for 24/7 treatment on demand. When people want help getting sober, we need to be there helping them. It is unacceptable, it is disgraceful, and it says something really sad about the state of affairs in our society when drug treatment centers and referral programs are only available Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, but our county jails are open 24/7, 365. We can do better, and we're pushing hard to do better in San Francisco.
Thank you so much, Chesa. And Rachel, you're on mute. You're on mute, Rachel.
I said, do you see why I love him? He's great. He's great.
So here's my question then. You know, I'm more solution oriented, right? So what type of sensible drug policy would you like to see in your city or county, right? If there's this like one or two things that you like, man, if we can do this, that this would actually take care of a lot of the problems that we're seeing in our jails and prisons.
So I believe a couple things, right? So for those of you that are listening or watching, we're not talking about the Navarro drug cartel or Del Rio from Ozarks, right? We're not talking about somebody who has an 18-wheeler of drugs bringing it into a community. That's different than a possession with intent to distribute, which is one of my top 15 areas of crimes that they love charging people with and wrapping them up in the system. And remember, even if you aren't a lawyer listening to this, intent to distribute is not actually distribution. It is an intent, right? And in Massachusetts, all it requires is one or two of the, indicators that they claim prove that you are going to distribute. So, if you have more than one parcel of drugs, so if you are doing crack cocaine and you have two different baggies of crack cocaine, well, that doesn't take into consideration. And this is why, Desmond, it's so important for us to have health experts and people that are actually You know, we have something called the Users Union in Massachusetts and Boston, where they are a unionized group of individuals that are, you know, still have substance use disorder, but are fully functioning individuals that are working on their addiction and their disease, right? But they are still people that can speak for themselves. We need them at the table to not just have Chesa and I come up with great ideas about how we think this is going to work, but actually hear from the people that are tied up in this system. What is it that you need to be successful? Of course, we need the public health officials and the law enforcement and others involved, but I really get disappointed when we don't have the users of the system, the individuals that can say to us, Rachel, I know you think, you know, when the Mass District Attorneys Association says, let's get more police down there, that'll fix it. That's not what we need. Like Chesa said, we need 24/7 treatment. We need, you know, vouchers so that we can take a lift to the place where they have us sign in. We need the ability to not have to just get our treatment. We should have better facilities. You shouldn't be able to only get treatment at the Nashua Street jail, right? And they're not set up for that. But that's what sheriffs love saying is, no, we're not going to let Chesa out because he doesn't have a place to live and he's actually safer here in jail with us. Who the hell do we think we are to tell somebody where they're safer to be if it is a disease or a health issue? We need to make sure we're partnering with experts in those areas. And I would venture to say, you know, I'm very good at a lot of things, but I didn't go to medical school. I'm not an expert in that. And we need to make sure we're opening the door to more expertise in this area.
Chesa, what are those two policies?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Desmond. Say it again. Desmond?
Yeah, well, we got you. Go ahead.
He's Chesa, he said, what are the two policies regarding drugs that you would want to implement?
So some of it we're already doing, but the first thing, thank you, Rachel. The first thing is, as I already said, we need to make it easier to get help than it is to get high. Our priority has to be treatment and services. As long as there are people who are addicted, who are seeking to buy drugs, there are going to be people who make a profit selling them. And so the number one priority has to be to invest in strategies that decrease addiction and substance abuse. That's the first thing. We cannot have a limitless budget for incarceration and for prosecution and for punishment while we ignore the supply, the demand side, while we ignore the fact that there are people who are demanding drugs, who are buying drugs because of addiction. And the second thing is I would invest in policies which actually provide economic opportunity to people who are dealing drugs. We cannot simply put people in jail or prison for X number of days, months, or years, give them a misdemeanor or a felony conviction, and then put them back on the street. Now, even more difficult for them to get a job or housing or education, and expect something is going to change. The recidivism rates we see across this country with regard to all manner of crimes show us that incarceration is not making us safer, is not changing behavior, is not rehabilitating people, is not decreasing access to drugs. And so what we need to do is treat every single arrest as an opportunity for intervention. And when it comes to drug sales, we're primarily talking about treatment and economic opportunity. Let's build economic opportunity, access to healthcare, access to treatment, access to education, access to housing, and our drug problem will go away.
And Desmond, let me add to you, the best thing I saw was a federal judge once asked this question, and I just was grinning. I was not the DA yet, in the back of the courtroom, where, you know, U.S. Attorney's Office, drug takedown, they're claiming we're helping the community. See, we got these 38 people or 48 people or whatever the number was off the streets, and, you know, they put the drugs on the table like in The Wire, which, by the way, if none of you are rewatching The Wire during this quarantine, look, do it. I just did it for the first time again. But anyways, put the drugs on the table, say all this. And the judge said, I have a question. Former public defender, Judge Sorokin. So did you take every one of their phones and look through each of the numbers and then call them to make sure all of the people they sold drugs to, you handed out information about treatment to them? Did you gather the people in the community that you watched all these controlled buys and make sure that they got the treatment that they needed? Did you have vans go down and do? So it's a lie. yes, it does remove the people from the corner for that day. And then there are new people back there taking advantage of individuals that are suffering, right, and in pain and struggling with an addiction. But what we need to do is a more holistic approach to the response, right? And I think we are myopic in this role, and we need people like Chesa and others who come with different viewpoints, because the answer to us for everything as prosecutors is jail. And it can't just be that, right? We have to be more inclusive, and it's hard, right? As lawyers, we like believing we're right and we have the answers and we don't need anyone else. We need to involve other people to make sure there's a holistic response to a community that is being harmed. And remember, those individuals we're arresting and we're charging with those distribution or trafficking crimes, they're part of the community too. And as Chesa and I know, 95% of the people we send away come back home. Are they better when they get here? Are their jobs available? Are they getting treatment for the trauma that they've experienced in their lives and all the other societal harms? We have to think holistically about these problems.
Wow. So, you know, this session here, I don't even know what to call it, but I tell you what, it is really just taking on a whole life of its own. You know, you guys really threw me off because I just knew I was going down a certain route today. But, you know, Chesa, when you dropped off, and then Rachael, she came up in there with this racial analysis, and, you know, and what I'm seeing is that that word that keeps just pounding in my head throughout this entire conversation is about a mindset. Even when Rachael talked about implementing policies in the office, but she had to follow up behind those policies because they weren't necessarily being adhered to. I want to go to you, Chesa, because, and believe me, it's about mindset. I took a couple of notes down when you was giving us just a brief intro. When you talked about that you were actually able to respond to COVID-19 almost immediately, and I think what you said was only 3 people tested positive in your jail, and there was 0 death, right? And then you had a number, I think it was at least 1/3 of the people that was in jail had been tested, right? But right next door to you, or right down the street from you, in 2 state facilities around Los Angeles, not to mention at Terminal Hall, that the number of confirmed cases really had actually skyrocketed, right? And so my question to you is, why do you think this is? I mean, what is that? What is the difference between what you did in San Fran and what's happening around the country? Here for instance, here in Florida, you know, one of our policy analysts, Angel, he's like really like fixated with tracking the number of positive cases and deaths in our prisons here in Florida. And we just seen the number go from 50% testing positive with less than 1% being tested, that it has skyrocketed to over 70% of people actually testing positive, but yet still probably less than 2% of the entire prison population have been tested. And we've been calling on our governor to listen, man, you've got to do more testing. You've got to get PPE in these prisons, and we're getting a little resistance here and there. But you were successful at that, right? So while we're struggling here, while we're struggling in Ohio with 78%, your district is like night and day. Why is that? And what is that mindset that actually drives you to do whatever it was that you did?
Well, I want to say a couple things about it. First of all, it is not over yet. And we worry every single day about the possibility that COVID-19 could spread like wildfire within our jail. But we have taken steps to prevent it, and thus far those steps have been successful. The number one thing we did, and I wish the President of the United States would have done this from the beginning, is we have listened to and followed the advice of public health officials. We have recognized that jails and prisons present the perfect conditions for the spread of COVID-19, for the creation of an epidemic within the pandemic. And we have recognized that if and when that happens, whether it's in Marion Prison in Ohio, whether it's in Rikers Island, New York, whether it's in Cook County Jail in Chicago, wherever it may be, when that happens, it will not just affect people who are accused of crimes or who've been convicted of crimes. It will affect every single one of us. I know that personally because my father's incarcerated in New York State prison, and he has been my whole life. But I know it also because incarceration has become a defining feature of modern American culture. We have over 500,000 people in this country who go into prisons as guards or correctional officers every single day. And we have many tens or hundreds of thousands more that go in as sheriff's deputies, as public health workers, as chaplains, as janitors. And so if and when COVID-19 spreads in jails and prisons, it doesn't just stay there. It goes home at night with the more than 500,000 people that work in jails and prisons. And it comes into the prison with them. And so we took decisive action in San Francisco at the very beginning of this pandemic to prevent that from happening. The action we took was to reduce the jail population, to decrease the number of filings that we made that would keep people in jail when there was no public safety issue, to expedite relationships that could allow for quick release of people to treatment centers, and to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves, do all these people really need to be in jail in the first place? We recognized that mass incarceration presents a very serious threat to public safety, and that it is in and of itself a public health problem. That if we don't take mass incarceration head on, if we don't reduce the number of people we put in jail, if we don't build out alternatives that allow us to hold people accountable and keep our communities safe without relying on jails, then we'll never be safe.
So then what are the categories of people who can go home? You know,
well, I'm going to give you some examples of people who, yeah, I mean, Desmond, there's people who shouldn't have been in there in the first place. I mean, when we started taking a hard look at the jail population, and my bet is you could do this in any county, in any jail or prison in this country. If you took a hard, close look at everybody who's incarcerated, you would find a lot of people and you just start scratching your head. How did that happen? We had a young woman with no criminal record whatsoever, convicted of a misdemeanor and serving time in county jail with a high-risk pregnancy. Now, what are we doing? How do we say to ourselves, this is in the public interest, this is in the benefit of public health or public safety, to take a young woman with no criminal record and a high-risk pregnancy and put her in jail? It makes no sense. So we found her, we got her out of jail, we got her into a prenatal care center, and she's still there today, thankfully. We found another woman, no criminal involvement whatsoever, but she'd been conserved. And she was sitting in jail, not because we were trying to convict her of a crime, but because the Department of Public Health didn't have anywhere to place her in an appropriate mental health facility. They're using the jail as a dumping ground for mental illness, for addiction, for all kinds of social problems. Well, we started pushing and we found her a place in a mental health facility that's much more appropriate for her needs than a county jail would ever be. There's a lot of people like that. And then there's others with addiction, with family needs. What we need to do in San Francisco and across the country is build out reentry services. We need to invest in support and reentry planning so that people have somewhere to go, that there's support, that there's supervision, and that when people are released, they don't end back up on the streets or in jail again.
And Desmond, when you look at what happened with Andrea Circle Bear in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, pregnant woman, gave birth and on a ventilator died a few weeks later. This is like, there is just such a problem where I feel like our system demands to be right and prefers finality and not looking backwards, than having hard conversations and looking in the mirror and saying, did we get this right or not, right? And remember, the resistance that we are meeting often, Desmond, is from the judiciary, who overwhelmingly are what? Former prosecutors, right? Yeah. And now, happily, many of them are also becoming former criminal defense lawyers, right? So I think it's a lot more balanced, hopefully now. But again, I echo everything that Chesa is saying. I feel like we still have a lot of work to do.
All right, so we got to wrap up, right? But I just can't resist the urge.
Hey, Desmond, we're just getting started. We're just
getting started.
Listen, it's not often that I could put a DA or state attorney on the hot seat, right? It's not often that I'm usually the one on the hot seat, so I can't pass this chance up, right? And so
Uh-oh.
I really want to, because I think that there is, I want to say like a catch-22, right? That's actually, would you believe that's my phone? Unbelievable. Catch-22 or a situation where damned if you do, damned if you don't. One of those categories, right? Because of course you talked about the young lady who passed away while giving birth, right? But how many stories are there like that? Is that the only type of person that we want to release? Is it the guy who is 90 years old and on his deathbed? Is that the only person that we try to release?
So I'll give you some real examples from Massachusetts.
All right, and here's the thing, right? Because I want you to speak into this context, right? Like I just mentioned, like Angel Sanchez, and then you got another guy like Bruce Riley in Louisiana, where they had like what is termed as violent charges, right? And in this pandemic, people would look at them and say, well, no, they don't deserve to be released because they're a danger to society. But both of these gentlemen are lawyers. Actually, Angel is getting ready. He just finished his last year at University of Miami Law School and getting ready to be an amazing lawyer. But if we looked at people in that context, if we have these clear-cut boxes, then you'll never let me go, right? And I have a law degree. And so what is that you struggle with as a state attorney or a district attorney in creating these categories? Or is there a need to actually go beyond the categories? Because I remember, Chesa, you was talking about how we can't just prosecute people who sell drugs or just bring the roof down on them, because it's much more complex than that. And that a lot of these folks are actually addicts who is failing to support their habit. So what are those circumstances that can be woven into and kind of dissipate this violent versus nonviolent separation, and actually start to look at people as people and actually saying, okay, who can we get out of these prisons or these situations? Was that a lot?
Yes.
I know
It's a lot, but it's a good question, Desmond, and it deserves a good answer. And it's not an easy thing. But I want to say that Rachael and I and other state attorneys, district attorneys around the country, we're on the front end of the system. And one of the real challenges that we have, and I know I lose sleep over it, is making difficult decisions in cases with real people where we don't have perfect information, and we're trying to do what's in the best interest of public safety, what's in the best interest of justice, and we're trying to respect the presumption of innocence and defendants' rights, procedural rights. We're trying to balance all that, and we know that there's a risk. We know that in some cases where we decide to release somebody, to give them the benefit of the doubt, that in some of those cases they will get rearrested, and that in some of those cases they will get rearrested for having done something violent. And we know that even if that's only 1% or less of the cases, those are the ones that get written about. Those are the ones that get talked about on the nightly news, the front page of the newspaper. Those are the ones that they try to use to define our policies. Even if 99% of the people who get released go home, take care of their kids, pay taxes, follow through with their treatment plan, come to court, do everything right, the ones that get remembered and talked about are the ones that don't go right. So that's a challenge that we have. That's a public relations challenge. It's a policymaking challenge. But when we're talking about mass incarceration, we're not just talking about jails. We're also talking about prisons. And this is where the work that Rachael and her office in Massachusetts have really led the way on is so critical, because we need to be talking to governors and to parole boards and to all of the powers that be at the state level about reentry for folks who've already served their time. There are way easier decisions to make when you're looking at the prison population, which is a much larger population than when you're looking at the county jail population, which is what primarily district attorneys and state's attorneys are doing. Why do I say that? You've got hundreds of thousands of people who have been in state prison for more than 10 years. You've got people who are over the age of 65. You've got people with long prison records that show they can program well, they can engage with services, they can educate themselves, they can stay out of trouble. And you've got people with reentry plans. In other words, you've got a large number of people where there is no rational or reasonable argument to suggest that their continued incarceration promotes public safety, that all it does, in fact, and we know this, is punish. And at that point, you have to say to yourself, is a commitment to draconian punishments that are harsher and longer than any other country in the world, in the history of the world, or the civilized world, are those punishments worth exposing people, including the prison guards and the staff, to COVID-19? Are they worth the bankruptcies that we're seeing of local governments and state governments because we can't afford to pay for our system of mass incarceration? What is the public benefit to ongoing incarceration of people? And I'm going to say, people like my father, 75 years old, served nearly 40 years in prison, does not have a single disciplinary record violation on his record. Today, legal aid lawyers in New York filed a writ of habeas corpus on behalf of my father and about 20 other elderly, medically infirm inmates who are in state prison, who have served their time, who have served decades. There is no public safety benefit to keeping people like that in custody. And in fact, it increases the chances that lives will be lost unnecessarily. We can do better, and governors have a key role to play in releasing people who have served their time and who have reentry plans and who have good prison records and who do not present a public safety risk.
So let me jump in. And what's hard about our job, though, Desmond, is we have the dual role of not only thinking about those individuals that have either certainly aged out of any criminality factors that we might think about, whether they in fact engaged in the violence or not, that they were found guilty of by, grand jury finding probable cause and then a trial jury, or they pled. We also then have to make the tough calls when we decide to not oppose the stay that they filed or actively be involved in their release, to the families of the victims and the survivors, right? Because there are individuals in Massachusetts, we would have done this even if we didn't, but a Victims' Bill of Rights, where we've had individuals. I have a man who's in his late 60s who it's alleged that he committed a murder when he was 19 years old. He's been in jail for 49 years and has a colorable, in Massachusetts, you need three things: the colorable claim or appeal, you need an individualized heightened risk for COVID-19. So one of the 30 factors the CDC has come up with: over 50 years old, immunocompromised, asthma, what have you, and then pose no material risk to society. But people in my office literally said, but he murdered somebody. And I said, oh, touche, right? 49 years ago, that one person, and by the way, the colorable claim is that in 1972 in Boston, the DA that had my job allowed every Black juror to be struck from the jury. It's a cross-racial crime. And I'm not even going to whether or not Mr. Arnie King in fact murdered the individual that was the victim. What I'm going to is the fact that I will not stand with my name on a pleading if the Constitution was so violated or the process was so cancered that it was rotten, right? So I don't even want to talk about necessarily, innocence versus guilt, et cetera. But we do also, Chesa and I have to make those hard conversations to the families of the victims that for 49 years believed that this was the person that stole the life of their loved one. And that's what's hard about our job. And to echo what Chesa said, why this job is so hard is that even when we make those decisions, and we will one day, Chesa, and somebody will get out and either do something little that nobody cares about or something huge that the media is going to pump up. And we can't be callous and say, but what about the 99.9% of the times that it worked, right? That you wrote no story about there. We have to be firm enough to stand up and take that criticism, speak to that family that was victimized if in fact it was a victim crime, but also say, and we are not going to change the policy, because less than 1% is never going to dictate what we're doing overall, but here are the new procedures we have in place to maybe make sure it didn't happen. But when I tell you the strength it requires to stand there firmly and say, and we are going to do this again, We need good comms teams, but we also need the listeners and viewers to be supportive of us when we know it's the right thing. But it is a hard job because we also have to speak to the victims of those crimes and do it, right? It's hard. Desmond, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Listen, what I was saying was that was a good segue into this next section, because all of the viewers and listeners, if you found this conversation to be exciting, invigorating, thought-provoking, I would encourage each and every one of you to check out realjusticepac.org, realjusticepac.org, so you can learn how you could actually get involved in making sure, like the people that you heard today or seen today in Rachael and Chesa, you know, if you want people like that in your judicial circuit, humanizing folks and really trying to bring about real justice, that's one of the many ways that you can get involved, and in addition to local organizations in your community. Rachael, I want to thank you once again for coming on this show. I think you're starting to be a regular now. You know, might have to have you co-host next time or something. And Chesa, let me tell you, whenever you decide to retire and move to Florida, you will find you a home with Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, because our membership also includes family members who have a loved one who is incarcerated. And so you will fit right in. I want to congratulate you all on the work that you all are doing, the movement that you all are making, and your willingness to really continue to be as bold and courageous as possible in pushing this envelope and really creating a more just system. Thank you all once again. Thank you all, everybody, for.
Yep.
Thank you.
And Chesa, I'm praying for your dad. That makes me happy.
Thank you,
I'll
Rachael.
keep my eye out.
Thank you,
Fingers
Rachael.
across,
I'll keep
Chesa.
you posted. I appreciate that.
Fingers across.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Chesa.
Stay healthy, stay safe, everybody.
Yeah, the one thing that you said, Chesa, that maybe we can actually have a real forum in real person, that would be awesome. I kind of love this. So I get to wear my wife's these Bermuda shorts that my wife bought me. They're real comfortable. So I kind of like this right here, what we're doing. So I don't know about the in-person stuff. I'll have to dress all the way up. But thank you so much. We should have you back real soon to talk some more about
I look forward to that, Desmond. Thank you for all your work. Stay safe.
All right. You have a good one.